of the ship adjusts.
It's perhaps the most famous disaster ever recorded.
The person in the front, get it started, get it started. It's crashing, terrible. Oh my, get out of the way, please. It's bursting into flames.
When the Hindenburg fell to earth in a ball of fire in 1937, the world had a front row seat.
All the humanity, all the passengers screaming around it.
But in 1930, no cameras were present to capture the disaster that befell the R-101 airship, which burst into flames in an equally spectacular fashion, killing 48 passengers and ending the British airship program. During the early 1900s, the majestic lighter-than-air dirigibles ruled the skies over Europe. While the airplane of the 1920s remained a work in progress, the airship was viewed as a sophisticated and efficient mode of air travel.
Airplanes were rickety and unreliable and noisy and uncomfortable and drafty and didn't carry many people. The Zeppelins had established an excellent reputation for reliability and safety, and they were so much more comfortable and would carry so many more people.
After World War I, the British Empire controlled roughly 1/4 of the Earth's surface. Looking for a way to connect its far-flung empire, Britain developed a program to build 2 airships. The R-100 would be built by private enterprise and would connect Britain to North America. The R-101 would be built under government control and would bring Britain closer to India and the Far East.
The R-101 was designed to be the largest airship that had ever been built. It was designed to have range sufficient that with just a couple of intermediate stops, it could go from England to India in less than a week, carrying 60 passengers in remarkable luxury.
Although Germany had a successful airship design with the Graf Zeppelin, Britain sought to improve upon it with the R-101.
The structural design and layout of the R-101 was very innovative. The dirigible itself was built in circular frames that had individual structural rigidity. Well, to build these rigid frames and still have this thing fly, the frames had to be built out of a very new material for the day called aluminum.
In a typical dirigible, passengers and crew were carried in gondolas that were suspended below the gas bag. In the R-101, they decided to streamline the vessel, and the passengers were actually inside. There were 2 levels, like on a ship, 2 decks, with all manners of staterooms and dining rooms and recreation rooms, smoking lounges. It was very luxurious.
Non-flammable helium, which was used on the U.S. airship Shenandoah, was not readily available in Britain. Thus, hydrogen, which is highly flammable but provides more lift than helium, was chosen for the R-101. 16 gas bags were held in a mesh screen containment above the passenger accommodations. Each bag weighed approximately 1,000 pounds. Together, they were designed to give the R-101 a gross lift of around 150 tons, more than any other airship ever built. In October of 1929, the 732-foot R-101 was taken out of its shed in Cardington to undergo preliminary testing in preparation for its maiden flight to India. Immediately it became apparent that the lighter-than-air ship wasn't all that light.
When the R-101 was first tested, they discovered the hard way that they had overbuilt it, and it was much heavier than they'd planned. It didn't have near the spare lift that they wanted or needed for the mission.
They discovered that the gas bags themselves, which, believe it or not, are made out of cow intestines, which are stitched together and then coated with varnish. These gas bags are leaking prodigiously. In fact, it has been reported that they were losing about 22,000 cubic feet of hydrogen per day from pinhole leaks.
An even more alarming problem arose in June of 1930. While the R-101 was moored to its tower, the outer covering along the starboard side suffered a tear that extended 140 feet, a fissure that would have been fatal had the ship been in flight. Engineers believed that gas bag leakage could be controlled with ballast, but to give the R-101 the required lift needed to journey to India, they opted for a radical solution. They cut the ship in half, adding an extra bay and an additional gas bag, making the world's longest airship even longer.
It was nearly 800 feet long. When you have something that's that long, the pressures on one end of the ship can be very different from the other end of the ship. You can have wind shears that act on the nose that don't act on the tail. So there's going to be some flexing and twisting, either nose to tail, up and down, or from side to side. And the metal structure was designed to actually flex, but that created some problems later on in that the fabric outer covering didn't flex in the same way that the rigid metal structure did.
By 1930, the R-101 was massively over budget and far past its original completion date. Political pressure over the ship's maiden flight to India began to mount.
The decision to take the R-101 to India was singularly driven by one man, and that was the first Air Lord, Lord Thomson. And he was the principal advocate and the guy whose prestige was on the line for the success of this program. And he fell back into his mode of management, which had served him well all in his career. Insist action occur, damn the doubters, we're going to go.
This was a government project, government funded, government controlled. When the Air Minister said, let's go, they went.
With great anticipation, 54 people, including Britain's Air Lord, boarded the R-101 on October 4th, 1930.
When the R-101 takes off from its hangar in Cardington, it symbolizes embarking upon the longest airship voyage in history. The first Air Lord is going to go all the way to India and back and do it in 2 weeks, which at the time would have been on the order of Hindenburg's flight across the Atlantic.
After the R-101 took off from Cardington, it circled over London, giving onlookers a chance to gaze at Britain's newest technological marvel. It then headed for the English Channel on its way to France. It would be the last time Britain would see the R-101.
They took off on a rainy, misty day, and the winds were along the path of travel in the 30, 35 mile an hour range. Not the most favorable conditions for dirigible travel, but certainly not the sort of things you would expect to wipe out this particular craft.
But just after 2 a.m., as the R-101 was passing through a rainstorm, the ship began losing altitude.
The captain assumed that the fabric had become waterlogged and too heavy. What he didn't know was that the top fabric from the nose back had ripped off, and the gas bags were exposed to the storm, to the rain, to the wind. And while it was only a moderate wind, 25 miles an hour, the airship was going at about 50 miles an hour. So this was hurricane-force winds blowing on these gas bags.
The high winds violently shook the gas bags closest to the ship's bow, causing them to chafe against the airship's frame. The added stresses turned the numerous pinhole leaks into a fatal fissure, accelerating the loss of hydrogen and causing the dirigible to nose over. Realizing that a crash was inevitable, the helmsman cut the ship's engines to soften the landing.
It's estimated they hit the ground at less than 13 miles an hour. Not even a bad bicycle fall, if the truth be known.
However, a spark from the twisted metal ignited the gas bag closest to the bow of the ship, setting off a chain reaction of fast-moving fires that spread from the bow to the stern, engulfing the airship in flames. Of the 54 people on board, all but 6 died, including Lord Thomson. Several of the survivors testified that the front end of the airship's outer covering had ripped off, a crucial piece of evidence that may have explained the loss of altitude. Covered by the dark cloud of the R-101's failure, the sister ship R-100 was dismantled and sold for scrap. The skeletal frame of the R-101, which represented the best technology in British lighter-than-air travel, was eventually sold for scrap as well, putting an end